Halo Marut.
Halo Mas Yanu.
Marut pakai laptop atau pakai HP?
Mas Yanu, maaf Mas. Saya baru aja pulang dari kampus, jadi masih pakai laptop, masih pakai
Pakai HP
HP.
ya? Oh, oke.
Tapi kalau jadi co-host bisa sih Mas.
Bisa ya? Aku jadi co-host ya.
Iya bisa Mas, bisa. Maaf ya Mas.
Sorry. Ini tadi suara.
Hello.
Hello Mark, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Are you in Thailand or
I
somewhere
am
else?
in Thailand. Yes. Nitin is in India, I believe.
Right. Hello Nitin. How are you?
How are you?
Good. Pretty good. So how's your holidays? Is that long holiday or?
It's not a holiday actually. It's just too hot there in Abu Dhabi, and professors, they are not. They can go anywhere. So this is the
Right.
time in July and August when there's no one there, or like very few people in the office. So everybody is working, but from more
From different places,
yeah,
from anywhere, right?
exactly. So I'm in India, and I'm
Yeah. What part of India are you in right now?
So right now I am in the Western Ghat region. So I'm, let's say, Mumbai, and then south of Mumbai there is a state called Goa. So I'm in Goa right now.
Oh, in Goa. Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we're still waiting for a couple audiences here and also Panawawi. We may start like 5 minutes from now.
Okay. Yeah. So we have shared the presentation with you,
Right. Yeah.
And the way we will go is I'll first cover, I don't know, like half of the presentation, and then half Mark will take up and Mark will finish the presentation. So one of us is going to share the screen, and no,
Yep.
what do you think, Mark? Or you want to switch?
Yeah, you can share yourself, or if you need help, I can share it from my screen. What do you think?
Right. I think it's better if I share.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
No problem. Yeah, no problem. Okay, we have Bu Norma here. Halo Bu Norma. Selamat siang. Good afternoon, Bu Norma.
Good afternoon.
I will change the background.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So we're still waiting for Pak Nawawi then, and Marlis, founder of Green Asia Network.
Yang apa ya?
Selamat siang Bu Nurma.
Halo, selamat siang.
Sehat Bu?
Iya, Mbak Sakti ya?
Iya. Long time no see.
Iya. Saya sampai ini lagi mikir nih Mbak Sakti. Pak Nawawi bisa? Mbak bisa, belum masuk ya?
Ya Ibu, ini lagi di reminder lagi, Pak Nawawi.
Saya harap bisa nyambung nih Pak Yanu bahan saya.
Ya, nyambung Bu, bagus sekali. Tadi saya baca udah, oh ya, mantap. Mohon maaf ini mendadak undangannya. Iya, salam kenal juga nih dari kelompok riset kami. Baru lahir di BRIN, jadi ini the first ever webinar yang kita lakukan. Dari udah 3.
Ya, sukses Pak Yanu ya.
Ya Ibu, terima kasih banyak dukungannya, waktunya juga. Jadi rencana ke depan kan kita mau bikin ini Bu Nurma, konsorsium. Jadi ada BRIN, tim BPS, Dirjen Pajak, lalu perguruan tinggi. Nah kita bikin pengukuran bersama gitu Bu, semacam buat annual report untuk inequality di Indonesia. Nah, nanti dibantu oleh teman-teman dari The World Inequality Lab. Ada Nitin, ada Mark, nanti ada teman-teman yang lain itu nanti bantu kita.
Halo Nitin
Rencana
and
seperti itu.
Mark.
Ya. Hey Nitin, hey Mark. This is Dr. Nurma. She is the director of Indonesian Statistics, especially for social resilience statistics.
Very nice to meet you.
Hello, nice to meet you, Dr.
And nice to meet you too.
Nitin now is a postdoctoral fellow in New York University in Abu Dhabi, and Mark is also a fellow for Paris School of Economics, right, Mark?
Yes,
Correct me if I'm wrong. Right.
You're correct.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, here, Panawi is already here. Good afternoon, Panawi.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello,
Hello, Bu Norma. Thank you for joining our webinar.
Ya,
Bu
Pak
Norma.
Nawawi. Apa kabar?
Baik, Bu Norma.
Panawi, do you have another meeting at office right now?
Yes, I have a double meeting at the moment.
Okay, thank
Double
you.
Zoom.
Yeah, thank you for, I think we need your opening remarks for this important discussion, I guess. So thank you for coming and join. It's already 2 p.m., but actually, and we're waiting for Mbak Marlis. Let me check 1 minute with her. All right, I think it's already 2 p.m. We don't want to waste a lot of our speakers' time, valuable time. So I think I will start our discussion this afternoon. And I believe that some people also will join our discussion. But we already have all the speakers and our chair of the research center. So let's start our discussion. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam sehat untuk kita semua. Thank you so much for joining our first ever webinar from research group that we already created this year called Poverty, Inequality, and Social Protection Research Group from the Research Center for Population, BRIN. So I think this is a small research group that focus on how we measure poverty, inequality, and social protection, especially in Indonesia. But also we want to learn more and dig more about the issues in the global area as well. So that's why today we have a special speakers, very, very special, I guess, from the World Inequality Lab. We have Nitin Bharti, PhD, and also Mark. I think we call him Mark, but his name is Tanasak Janmana, PhD candidate. And also we have Dr. Nurma Midayanti from BPS, Statistik Indonesia. And we will have Mbak Marlis, founder of Green Network Asia. She will come in a couple of minutes. So to open this discussion and give us some opening remarks, I will invite Dr. Nawawi, PhD, as a chair of Research Center for Population to give us opening remarks. Time is yours, Pak Nawawi.
Okay, thank you, Mas Yanu. Good afternoon, everyone. Our distinguished speakers, Dr. Nitin Bharti, and also Tanasat Janmana from Thailand, I think, and also Dr. Nurma, and also Ms. Maria Afrit, all our respected speaker today in our webinar talking about the Global Inequality Report 2023. I welcome all of you in our webinar hosted by Mas Yanu and other colleagues from research group on poverty, inequality, and social protections, one of our research group among 13 research group in our research center for population branch. And I think today's discussion is quite interesting, talking about the global inequality report. And we have two speakers from outside from that's I think I know Mr. Nitin will work with the data on inequality and also Tanasaks also, because we have had a meeting before talking about the how the data of the inequality is very important for us, especially in Indonesia, as we also have a problem with the inequality and also extreme poverty. And I think it's also very important to all of you to download the report, because I read the report and it's very interesting. One of the statements in the report said that inequality is not is part of the political issue, not inevitability. I think this is quite interesting statement that we can discuss here in this discussion about how we understand about inequality and how we should aware about the data, and also how we should find the solution, especially in Indonesia. And in the report, we can also see how the inequality move from developed country and also to the developing countries such as in Indonesia. So I really support this discussion, and hopefully we can get new insights from Nitin and Tanasaks about the global global inequality reports, and also how we respond this in terms of in Indonesia case. And I think that's all, Mas Yanu, as introduction for me, and we do hope that we can get a fruitful discussion through this webinar. Good luck of all of you.
Thank you so much, Pak Nawawi, for the brief opening. And as Pak Nawawi mentioned, this is a really important issue in our country, not only in our country, but all around the world. The inequality is just something that everywhere. It's like we can see inequality in our daily lives, but not much people or institution or academia that are really focusing on this, measuring inequality, especially in Indonesia. So that's why we bring this idea and this topic in our webinar or discussion, because we want to learn more and trying to understand better about how inequality, what causes inequality. Is it because of the policy from the countries, or is it because of disparities, or what is the cause of inequality itself if we never trying to solve the inequality problem? So what it costs to our next generation, something like that. So this is really important. Besides, we always hear about poverty in one side, but I think it's less public interest or discussion on inequality, this is the more persistent and the more, or the bigger problem than the poverty itself. So without further ado, I think we want to listen more and learn more from Nitin and Mark. I think they already have a presentation and they will split time for presenting their presentation. So time is yours, Nitin and Mark. I think we'll go first, Nitin or Mark first.
Yeah, thank you, Yano. I
Okay,
will
go ahead. Yeah.
Let me also share the screen.
Sure.
So, and let me know if you can see it properly.
Yeah, perfect.
It's okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
So thank you, Yano, for introducing us, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to present here. And I'm very happy to be representing World Inequality Lab, me and Mark both here. And from World Inequality Lab team, we also have coordinator of East Asia region, who is there in the call. So I guess we have some more representation from the lab. And So it's a very nice opportunity, and personally, so as a brief introduction, Yanu has already mentioned, I'm a postdoc fellow at New York University, Abu Dhabi, started last year. I'm also a coordinator of South and Southeast Asia region in the lab. So basically in the lab, the entire world is divided into different regions, and I have the responsibility for this particular one. Mark, who is my friend and a colleague, is a research fellow at the World Inequality Lab in Paris School of Economics, and he's going to start his PhD this year. Okay, so let me jump onto the presentation. If you have any doubt or anything, you can, of course, interrupt me, or you can wait till the end for the Q&A session. So a brief introduction of the lab. So basically, World Inequality Lab, it is physically present at the Paris School of Economics in Paris, on one of the floors of the institute. However, it's quite global in nature from several regions. So the first thing, that's why we call it Global Research Center there. And it's one of the main contribution is the creation of World Inequality Database, which provides the evolution of income and wealth inequality statistics for more than 140 countries and for several decades. So our objective is to sort of come up to sort of estimate the inequality in long run, to understand how the inequality dynamics is evolving over time and in different countries. It's also global in nature, given we have more than 100 researchers who are present in different countries and who are working towards this, because as you can understand that to get this global perspective, it's very difficult for one person to have like country-wise such knowledge. So in that sense, our researchers, they come from different countries, and it helps to get the country-wise insights. We produce a lot of research articles which are published in reputed journals, books, reports, and we don't only restrict to academic writing. There are several media interventions, several conferences, which are actually an outlet for taking the message from this research to outside audience as well, and not just to restrict to the academic ones. And that's why one of the, as we say, in one of our objectives is to sort of take out this message beyond academicians and disseminate to larger audiences. Now, one of our objectives here is in creation of World Inequality Database is to monitor inequality in the distribution of income and wealth. So today, as you know, like in most of the countries, the focus always remains on the total economic output, which is GDP, let's say. However, there is less debate or less conversation on the distribution of this total output in the society. And our objective here is to sort of take some of the attention away just on the GDP, but bring it to the distribution of that GDP in the society. So for that, we constantly endeavor to monitor the inequality statistics. And that's why from last 3 years, every year, we try to update the inequality statistics for each country. And that's why it has become very dynamic. So we don't wait for like 5-10 years to do that. So it has become much more regular in nature. And our ultimate aim is that the distribution of income and wealth is produced produced via the public institution. So for example, how public statistics now talk about GDP in the similar manner, if we hope that one day this inequality statistics is included in those public reports. So regarding this, our research themes broadly, the first and foremost is basically the methodological contribution, where we try to get the data from different countries, and the data are in different types, different formats. So the first and foremost thing is to sort of create a comprehensive comparable statistics through which we can compare the inequality in different countries. So this is the first contribution. The second is basically the research theme is revolved around understanding the country-wise inequality dynamics. So one is the global one, and then how within a country temporally, that by time how things are changing. And then we try to connect it with the existing policies and politics to understand if it has any role in the dynamics of the inequality. And recently, as you have seen through this World Inequality Report, we are moving into some new dimensions which are not completely different from the inequality. It is interconnected with the income and wealth inequality, which is gender inequality and environmental inequality, which Mark is going to speak later on. Okay, so in this endeavor, we have developed partnerships with several institutions, starting from World Bank, United Nations Development Program, so using their data, using their connections, and so on. We also have developed partnerships with national statistical offices in some countries, where basically, as I mentioned, that now the statistical offices have started producing the inequality measures, because the way it has developed is that we transfer the knowledge to the statistical offices, and then it becomes a regular affair. And we also have developed partnerships with the different research institutions across the world in different countries, like Luxembourg Income Study, CQ, Southern Center for Inequality Studies, and so on. And we hope like this kind of partnerships we develop with in Indonesia, and that's why that's our ultimate goal here. So let me now move to the some main results and, let's say, findings from the World Inequality Report on the global inequality. So this report was second in the nature that the first World Inequality Report came out in 2018, where the income and wealth inequality for each and every country was discussed in much more detail. In this report, the country-wise inequality statistics is there. So of course, there is an update of the inequality statistics to bring everything to 2021 level, and more, further then to understand this inequality from global perspective. So here the first graph, as you can see from here, that different countries or different regions in the world are not similar in nature. So here, for example, we can see the average income, how it differs. So for example, in North America, the average income is 315% of the global average. Whereas if you look at the sub-Saharan Africa, the income in that region is just 31% of the global average. So you can see that there is a diversity moving from sub-Saharan Africa to North America in terms of increasing percentage of the global average. One thing to note here is that, for example, MENA, which is Middle East and North Africa region, and East Asia region, they are quite at the similar level in terms of the average incomes, let's say. I want to make this point because later on we will see that how these two regions, even though when they have very similar level of average incomes, their inequality in the country is at a very different level. But before that, here we see how the global income and wealth inequality looks like in the current period. So from the latest report of 2021, we see, if we look at the income, the top 10% of the richest individuals in the world took 52%, or they earn 52% of the total income. Whereas the bottom 50% of the population, it earns 8.5% of the total income. Okay, which already shows that there is a very high level of inequality where, like, let's say if everything was perfectly equal, which is, we all know is not possible, but still, let's say going in that direction, the top 10% should have like 10% of the total, but the share they earn is much higher. Now, if we look at on the right-hand side, the wealth graph, the wealth inequality is much more higher, where the richest 10% individuals own 76% of the total net wealth, in fact, and the bottom 50% owns just 2% of the total net wealth. But if we look this inequality, income inequality, so in this presentation, I'm just going to focus on the income inequality to make things simpler and easier. Though in the report, there is a detailed discussion on the wealth inequality as well. So here, for example, if we look at the income inequality in different regions, we see that the levels are different, very different in different countries or different regions, in fact. Like, for example, in Europe, the top 10% share is approximately 36%, which is at the bottom end of the distribution. Whereas if we look at the Middle Eastern region, where the inequality is the highest, where it's almost the top 10% is now earning approximately 60% of the income. And yes, if we look into South and Southeast Asia, I don't know if this marker is to point me there, but it's approximately 52%. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so it will remain there. And so this is a snapshot of what the top 10% income share in different parts of in different countries around the world. And as you can see, that almost all the major countries are now covered in this report to basically to provide a complete picture of the inequality. But as later on, we will talk about that in different countries, the type of data and the quality of the data which is available, it varies a lot. And even though it looks like, okay, the work is done, however, there is a lot of work which needs to be done to sort of make these statistics, let's say, more robust. Okay. Then here, for example, okay, so till now we have looked at this inequality overall, the global picture, but how this inequality has evolved in long run. So this is a paper by Lucas Chancel and Thomas Piketty in 2021, which tries to bring together this global inequality statistics in the long run. So basically pushing it further till 1820. And as you know, like as you go back, the data, the quality of data starts becoming poorer and poorer, and as you are in the recent years, the data quality is much more better. So as we can see here in this graph, let's say if we just focus on the top 10%, in the 19th century, it sort of increased at the global level. And then from 1920 onwards, there is a small decline in the share of income going to top 10%. However, post 1980, we see that there is an increase here. Other thing to note is that the bottom 50% share has always remained much lower, even though in recent years, several emerging economies have performed much better with higher growth rate, and they are doing much more better. But still, you see that the share which is going to this bottom 50% of the global bottom 50% of the population, which essentially the majority of them come from emerging countries, the share has not increased that much. Okay. The other sort of dynamics in this global income inequality is if you split this inequality into between country and within country analysis. And here the interesting fact is that from 1900 to let's say till 1980, as you can, so the top one, that is the red color, is basically the within country inequality. And as you can see, the share of within country inequality declined in between like 1920 to 1980 period. And we are going to talk about how it worked, why it happened. Whereas post 1980, we see that again, the within country inequality has started increasing, and the between country inequality is decreasing. So between country inequality in recent years is on decline because several emerging countries are now doing much more better. So at the country level, so between countries, basically, if you assume that in a country, everyone has the same level of income, and then you try to compute the inequality in different countries. And so as the countries go up, you will find, or if they start performing better, you see that their between component is declining. However, the within country component is started increasing post 1980s. Okay. Now, why this dynamics in long run is happening? So, for example, in the decline which we saw in the 1920s to 1970s in different countries, especially the decline in the within country income inequality is mainly, driven by the developed countries, but also from the emerging countries. So in the developed countries, for example, this was the time period when, it was a very dynamic time period where first you had these world wars starting from, where a large destruction of physical capital happened. Then all these countries started adopting several egalitarian policies and so on. So there is a mix of several things happening together during this period, which contributed in the decline of the income inequality in each countries. Okay, and so for example, just to give you like an understanding of how these states, they have started adopting these egalitarian policies. So here, for example, there is we can see that what is the how much tax each country, how much tax Western or like European countries have started garnering with respect to the share of national income over different time periods. So for example, here post 1950, as you can see, the overall curve has started increasing, where the tax spending or the tax collection started increasing at a higher rate. And in recent years, actually by 1990, you see there is sort of a plateau where the tax collection is now approximately 47% of the total national income. And this 47%, more or less, post 1980, there is kind of stabilization in terms of where this money is getting spent, and 6% of the total 6% of total tax is going to education, 9% to healthcare, and 6% to social transfer and other social expenditure. And this is actually quite a lot if we compare it to other emerging countries where they have not reached to this level. In fact, as we will see later, that many emerging countries are actually struggling to increase their tax collection. So during this time period, there were a lot of reasons happening in the developed countries. Emerging countries, several new countries, they got independent, and there were they also adopted different policies ranging from communist, socialist, planned economies. And so there was also, because of these political and social shocks, there was in general decline in the inequality even in the emerging countries, and of course at a different rate. And Russia seems to be the country where the abolition of private property led to a very fast decline in the inequalities in that region. So for example, here, just for a comparison, if we look at the top 10% income share in France, Russia, and the US in long run, we see that it drops quite a lot from 1905 to this, and then it remains till that point. And post 1980, this is a global phenomena where in every country there is an increase of inequality, and this is the other part. But let's say if from 1920 to 70 or 1900 to 1980, we see a strong decline in inequality in Russia. Okay, now, so this was about 1920s to 70s. What started happening post 1980s is at the global level, changes started happening. There was competition to bring in corporates to the country. The overall, the taxation or the tax rate starts declining in each country. Not only like corporate tax, but also personal income tax. In several countries, inheritance tax were removed, or they were made more flexible, or wealth tax got removed. And so post 1980s, we see that there are a lot of changes happening around the world in different countries, which has led to increase in the inequality in nearly all the countries, be it very super developed country or be it emerging countries. But however, of course, the path in different countries is different. The policies which they are implementing is different, and hence it's kind of important to understand country by country that why things are moving in that direction. However, it's also important to see this pattern that across all the countries you have this increasing trend. Okay, and the other challenge which comes when it comes to understanding this long-run dynamics of income inequality is that in several low-income and middle-income countries, there is very less data as we go in the past. So it starts becoming a challenge. So here, for example, if we look at the growth in the 1980 to 2016 period for different countries, India, US, Canada, Russia, China, and Europe, you see an increasing pattern, right? Like they were approximately at 20 to 40%, but now we see that, especially, for example, India has gained quite a lot. Like the top 10% population is owning around 55% in India. And if we look at this very famous elephant curve, which is about understanding how in between 1980 to 2016, the growth is captured by different percentile of the population, here we see that of the entire growth, bottom 50% during this period, they captured 12% of the total growth, which is mainly coming from the rising of the emerging countries during this time period. Whereas the top 1% captured 27% of the total growth. So it shows, like, because of this capturing of growth by different subgroups at different levels, that is what is actually leading to the increase in the income inequality. Okay, so the main takeaways, let me sort of summarize my portion before Mark starts, is that we find that the contemporary income wealth inequalities are very large. The richest 10% of global population currently takes 52% of global income, whereas the poorest half earns 8.5% of it. Even though there is the comparison at the world level is done at the average standard of living, but it seems to be, it's an unreliable determinant when it comes to the inequality. So it demands that there should be a separate comparison of the inequality at the world level for different countries. The degree of inequality within a society is fundamentally a result of political choices, as we have seen. Because, like, you have, for example, Europe and US, which are almost at the same level of economic prosperity. However, the inequality in the US is much more higher than the inequality in the Europe. So, and today, of course, all the countries are at different level of average incomes and inequality. And it is important to understand the path of the evolution in different countries. Hence, it requires a country-wise long-run study. Mark, you can take over from here.
Yes, thank you, Nitin. Perhaps if the audience has some question for now, I think there was a lot of material maybe. Would anyone like to ask some question in between before we continue?
I think you can continue, Mark, and then we have discussion at the end of the discussion.
Perfect. All right. So as the World Inequality Lab, like our team was building these blocks of country-wise estimates to try to understand the evolution of each country, and we start to get a bigger picture, right, of this global trends of inequality. And it begs a lot more question, right? How can we explain such rise of inequality? How has that rise in inequality since the 1980s affected different issues? And also we're interested in how can we remedy the situation, perhaps, if it needs remedying, right? So we have developed many other new research focuses that Nitin has already mentioned quickly at the beginning. For instance, gender inequality in terms of the inequality in terms of carbon emissions, in order to understand, for instance, how can we fight climate change, and also other issues such as political cleavages and the impact of climate change, for instance. All right. Now, so in the second 2022 World Inequality Report, we have some results on these issues to present to you guys. First, perhaps we can have a general look, an overview of the situations. Oops. Sorry, did I lose the...
Yeah, I think you lose your presentation. Share screen.
I was talking quite a long time, didn't I?
No problem. Yeah, it's already back. Go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
All right, I apologize. All right, so when did I skip out? All right, but anyway, so again, like we want to understand, right, these long-run trends and how it has impacted different social issues, right? And one of the major topic that are now like one of our research focuses is gender inequality, right? And combining statistics from countries from around the world, we find that, well, in terms of gender parity between male and female population of the world, there's still a very, very large gap. Right. In 1990, as we can see in this graph, right, again, if we consider female population to be about 50-50 with, you know, the gender split in terms of population share, an equal or equitable distribution of, for instance, labor income should be at about 50%. Right. At the global level, we find that that is not the case. In 1990, it is at about 30%. And there has been a very, very slow progress, right? By 2015, 2020, if we take the average, it is very close to 35%. So about 5 percentage point increase, right? Now, this slow progress, right, is due to many structural problems that we all know of. For instance, in terms of social beliefs, in terms of access to education, access to healthcare, so on and so forth. And in this regard, right, if we look at the gender gap, the labor income gap, at a regional level, we also find that, well, there are large regional differences as well. Right, some groups of economies are doing better than the others. For instance, in North America and Latin America is doing relatively okay. China with decline, the only region with some decline in terms of gender parity. And Asia, excluding China, and MENA being the group of economies that is doing the least well in terms of redistributing, distributing labor income between genders, right? And we can kind of also reflect on this situation if we look at, for instance, the top 1%, right? Nitin, if we go to the next slide. If we look at, for instance, the top income earners of the global economy, we will find that there is a long-term persistent underrepresentation of women in top-paying jobs, right? And this may be due to a very, life cycle problem in terms of investments since birth to social beliefs, to behaviors, so on and so forth. Right. For instance, in the US, women, for the top 1% wage earners, out of all the top 1%, women makes up about 17% out of it. And in the US, and in Spain, it's about 23%. We see more equality, I guess, in terms of being the top wage earners in Western Europe and actually Canada. Nitin, next slide, please. Another issue that we are very interested in at the moment, of course, is the topic of climate change, right? As we all know, Southeast Asians, we know it's very hot right now this year. And it's been the hottest year, I think, in 120 years globally, this past 4 or 5 months. And in order to address climate change, we need to understand where it comes from, right? And based on our database, we find that the top 10% of the global population emits about half, right? The top 10% emits about half of world carbon emissions. And this data is from about 2019. Right? Meanwhile, the bottom 50% contributes to about 12%. Right? So we already see in terms of, well, who is causing, let's say, the greenhouse gases to be accumulated? We find that, yes, it is indeed a rich versus poor countries kind of problem. Right? But we also find that not only is it a between country problem, it is also a within country problem. For instance, Nitin, next slide, please. Yeah, if we look at, for instance, within regions, right, we find that most of the time, right, even amongst the rich economies or advanced economies like North America or Europe, the poorest half, the bottom 50% of these regions are already within their, let's say, 2030 climate targets that they set, right? Meanwhile, in poorer countries, the richer part of the population is contributing much more than the poor in advanced economies, right? So we find that, well, sure, it's not only a between country problem, it is also within, right? And in order to adequately, let's say, address climate change and design policies such as carbon tax or carbon credits, so on and so forth, we must also look at how these policies impact different groups of people within the economy. Right? In the case of South and Southeast Asia, we're one of the lowest level of carbon emitters, but still we do observe large differences. The difference between the top 10% and bottom 50% emission of carbon is about 10 times difference. Right? This data is in tons of CO2 per person per year. And the global average is about 6.6, right? Nitin, next slide, please. Right, so again, within country, emissions inequalities now account for about 2/3 of global emission inequality, right? And this again have major implications on global debates on how should we tackle climate change. Now, a good example, of course, of what to do in face of climate change is to increase tax on carbon, right? In terms of gas, in terms of fuel, or transportation costs, so on and so forth, right? And these movements in terms of policy pushes have seen backlashes in many countries. For instance, in Ecuador, in Chile, Ecuador and Chile in 2019, the price of transportation was increased and gasoline was much more expensive, for instance. The Yellow Vest movement in France, I'm not sure, I've heard Indonesia is also considering similar things in terms of kerosene or something like that. Now, of course, if we have that picture in mind of who is emitting the carbon within each country, we'll find that, well, the poor are already within the budget, right? And most of the time, these increases in taxes will affect disproportionately, and actually disproportionately affect the poor and the middle income group more. All right, and hence these policies that, well, in theory, in intention, is out of good nature to fight global climate change, but it does not have support and therefore does not work. Or maybe we can even say that it does not directly have any effect on, let's say, energy consumption of the rich, which again are the groups with the largest level of emissions. Right. So building these database of how income correlates with, let's say, carbon consumption, will correlate with gender, have allowed us to understand much more of the global situation in terms of inequality in various directions, not only income and wealth. All right. Into next slide, please. Now, and this bring us to the last part of the presentation. In order for us to, again, have this global picture for majority of the countries, we must have very good estimates, right? And in the case of Indonesia, we have some, right? Everyone, I believe that everyone here knows average national income of the Indonesian adult population is about $12,000 in PPP terms, in dollars PPP. Top 10% earns about, based on our very still not as advanced estimates as the US, let's say, but we find that the top 10% earns about 20 times more than the bottom 50, where they basically the income share of the richest 10% is about 50% of the overall national income of the country. So this goes in the same level as Thailand, about close, where very unequal. Thailand, as I can say personally, it's a very unequal country. Also very close to the level of Brazil, which is about, I think in the latest estimate is about 51%. Meanwhile, the top 1% shares about 18 to 20% of all national income, right? And this level seems to have been around there since the 1900s, since the turn of the 20th century. Now, in terms of our estimates of female labor share, how much the female adult population earns in proportion of all labor income in Indonesia, it is at about 25%, with some improvement from the 1990s when it was at about 21%. And again, the greenhouse gas footprint for Southeast Asian nations is quite low. For Indonesia, it's about 3 tons per person per year. Again, the world average is 6.6. And in India, it's 2 tons per person. In China, it's 8 tons per person, for instance. So in the global kind of picture, let's say, Indonesia is still very much a low carbon emitter compared to richer countries. But of course, the question is, how is that being distributed within Indonesia? Like, who is releasing how much? You know, which income group is responsible, let's say, right? Now, in terms of long run understanding of Indonesian inequality, here we have estimates that was done by a researcher whose name is Pierre van der Ing. He does a lot on economic history of Indonesia. Using tax data in the 1920s, he found that, well, the top 1% income was increasing quite fast in the early half of the 20th century. And it was stable around, you know, pre-World War II area. And then there was a period where there was no data. And using household survey data, it seems that, well, inequality might have fallen to, well, top 1% income share falls to about 7 to 8%, rose again before the Asian financial crisis, and then crashed. Inequality falls after the Asian financial crisis. And this is also a very similar pattern in Thailand. High inequality rising in 1980s, and then after the turn of the 21st century, it starts declining. But then again, this is a very incomplete picture. Number one, because, and this is the case for every single country, right? The survey data tends to omit the richer part of the population. Right? In Thailand, it's just impossible to access them to answer questionnaires because they live in gated communities, they live in high rises. So hence, in the case of the World Inequality Database, who have pushed for the combination between survey data usage and tax or other forms of administrative data usage to establish a long-run picture of the situation, to understand why a country is at where they are now and what can we do about it. All right. Nitin, next slide, please. Yes. So, and again, so I believe that there's a lot of rooms of improvement for Southeast Asia. Right now, work on Thailand is being improved, work on Malaysia is being improved, and we hope that we can get to improve the Indonesian data together and have a perhaps also better understanding of the inequality, whether in economic term or in social term, in the long run in Southeast Asia. Because having a very detailed database of how income and wealth is distributed is not only useful for academic research, it will lend to interesting policy discussions, for instance, on public policy, on taxation reforms. We have already seen how understanding the issue of inequality will influence perhaps proper carbon tax design, for instance, right? How can we reduce gaps between regions and poverty, so on and so forth. And to conclude, Nitin, last slide, please. Right. So the problem today is that still in many countries, inequality is being discussed, and that is good. I think it's a show political process, but there are not a lot of statistics being part of that discussion, right? Thailand, we say all the time, Thailand is so unequal, right? We see people driving crazy cars and in slum areas, but only recently did we have statistics, and it allow us to have a much more fruitful public discussions about what can be done. And the current problem around the world is that there's a heterogeneity of data. What that means is that, for instance, the definition is different maybe one country observe income to be a certain definition, another may include or exclude different types of income, or it can be due to level of observation. For instance, Thailand's perhaps observing at household level, which again ignores its distribution of income between household members, for instance, between genders. And therefore, what we are hoping to do as a research lab is to push for a public data system of inequality estimates, like top 1 to 10%, that is standardized across all countries, so that we can understand and compare the experiences of different countries. And also, it will perhaps hopefully allow us to understand a regional and global picture as well. How has globalization affected Southeast Asia since 1980s, let's say? How has that fruit been distributed between different Southeast Asian nations, and within each nations, who benefits and why? And so in this effort, we value very much partnerships with government agencies, as you have seen, as Nitin have lined out, because they have a crucial role in data collection and access, and these collaborations are always very important. And also with academic research labs or groups, as then we can contribute much more to measurements and analysis. And so all of this is to perhaps help the dialogue at the national and international level of the situation. So that's it from me and Nitin. If you guys have any questions, we would be very happy to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Much appreciated, Nitin and Mark. I think in 45 minutes, you guys brought very, very important issues, inequality within countries, between countries, and also, like, though you say that Indonesia or Southeast Asia is the lowest contributor for climate inequality, but still, I think we need to have more concern on that right now, and have some policy to anticipate in the future. And also, I think we heard a lot of conceptual, like in inequality, that probably some of the audience is very familiar, but some of them maybe not familiar. Don't worry about that. We will have this discussion in the near future as well, not only in this first, but we'll have the second, third, and later more discussion deeply to get a better understanding of inequality in Indonesia or in the global context. So again, thank you so much, Nitin and Mark. So before we go to the next panelist or discussion or speaker that we already have here, let me introduce Dr. Nurma Windayanti. She is the Director of Resilience Statistics in BPS. A little bit about her background. She holds a postgraduate environmental science from Okayama University in Japan, and also Faculty of Economics and Business in University of Indonesia. And she is right now as a Director of Social Resilience Statistics from the BPS. So Dr. Nurma will bring us to the Indonesian context probably, and give some feedback on your presentation as well. And then after Dr. Nurma, we will have Marlis Frida as one of the young scientists and also young researcher and founder of Green Asia Network, that will give more on the green aspect of inequality, like Mark already mentioned about the environmental or environmental justice, or maybe about the gender and also the carbon inequalities in Indonesia. Okay, so I will invite Dr. Nurma to present her presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, thank
Go ahead.
you, Pak Yanu. Good afternoon, everyone. Excellencies Pak Nawawi, Pak Yanu, Nitin, and Mark, and also Mbak Marlis, Bu Marlis, yeah, and all of the audience. I would like to present only about, not only about inequality, but also poverty, because these two topics are interrelated. The poverty and inequality measurement is based on the same data, namely expenditure per capita from the Indonesia Socio-Economic Survey. That's why I am decide to present about poverty also. In the first slide, based on 2015, 2045 Indonesian population projection, Indonesia has more than 276 million people. Major concentration on the islands of Java, we can see from this figure, which is considered the most densely populated place in Indonesia, also maybe in the world, because very, very dense. Of the other islands, those surrounding Java and Bali, Sumatra, the left island contains some of the most significant clusters, particularly in the south and along the northeastern coast near Medan or North Sumatra. And also the cities of Makassar in Sulawesi, Banjarmasin in Kalimantan, and also heavily populated. On the other hand, distribution of GDP also shows a similar pattern. The spatial structure of Indonesia's economy during Q1 2023 is still dominated by provincial groups in Java Island that contribute to GDP by 57%. In every island show almost same with the population distribution. We have read the summary of the report and in the forward, I read that we still lack basic information about inequality, but the GDP is closely related to economic growth, both nationally and in the region below it, such as islands and provincial. Economic growth numbers are published every year in Indonesia from BPS, but they do not tell us about how growth is distributed across the population, about who gains and who loses from economic policies. Therefore, poverty in Indonesia is still high, as well as income inequality that in BPS statistics measured by expenditure. I would like to present about this topic, how the differences of measurement in poverty and inequality between global and Indonesia. We have identified the differences measurement between global poverty and poverty in Indonesia. First, about the differences of measurement between global poverty, as we can see in the left section, is the concept used in calculating poverty by World Bank, is using the concept of purchasing power parity or PPP, which allows comparison of poverty levels among countries that have different price level or cost living. from this data, we can compare about extreme poverty among countries. The PPP is an international price index that is measured by the amount of money needed to buy the same basket of goods in each country that is compared using US dollar. And extremely poor people are the people with the expenditures below the extreme poverty line. The extreme poverty line use the standard set by the World Bank, namely the international poverty line of US $2.15 based on 2017 PPP. And the Indonesian government still use the old poverty line, US $1.9 based on 2011 PPP as a baseline until 2024. Then the conversion of extreme poverty line into rupiah is carried out by the World Bank using PPP resulting from the ICT. And how the calculating of poverty in Indonesia? BPS Statistik Indonesia use the concept of the ability to fulfill basic needs. With this approach, poverty is seen as an economic inability to fulfill basic food and non-food needs as measured by the poverty line. The detail of this explanation we can see in the box. Yeah, the poverty line is the value of spending on minimum food needs equivalent to 2,100 kilocalories per capita per day. And the non-food poverty line is the minimum requirement for housing, clothing, education, health, and other non-food commodities. And the poor are the people who have an average monthly per capita expenditure below the poverty line. We use this method since 1998, so that the calculation results are consistent and comparable from time to time and apple to apple. And the primary data source from National Socioeconomic Survey or SUSNAS. And the result for our measurement we can see in the next slide. Well, we can see from these figures, so the condition of poverty in Indonesia, and we compare extreme poverty that World Bank released and how differences with BPS calculation. In the above line, poverty, the poverty that BPS calculated described by a poverty rate of 9.36%, or these are about 25.9 million the poor in March 2023. After COVID-19 pandemic, the numbers tend to decrease. For extreme poverty, from the figure, we can see that the extreme poverty continues to decline using both of poverty line of US $2.15 PPP and US $1.9 PPP. I think this is because the Indonesian government pays great attention to reducing extreme poverty, so that by 2024 it will be close to 0%. Sorry. And the next slide. This is the differences of inequality measurement between global and Indonesia. We check from data source, inequality type, and variable use. And last, from methodology, we can see that the data source from World Inequality Report is from World Wealth and Income database, while Indonesia or BPS calculate inequality by using National Socio-Economic Survey. And for inequality type and variable use, the report use income inequality and wealth inequality, while BPS use expenditure inequality, and we not calculating about wealth inequality. And in methodology, the report use Gini ratio, the bottom 50%, T1 ratio, top 1%, top 0% versus bottom 15%. Also use GIC, cell index, Alpine curve, and so on. But in Indonesia, we calculate the Gini ratio for measure the inequality in Indonesia based on Lorenz curve. And we also use the World Bank distribution that population are divided into 3 groups. 40% of the low income or expenditure, 40% of the middle income, and 20% of high income. We also calculate the TEL and L index, but not published. And in this slide, to give the information about how inequality is based on BPS calculation, these figures show trend of Gini ratio from March 2019 to March 2023. Actually, until September 2019, the Gini ratio showed a downward trend at the national level. This condition indicates an important an improvement in expenditure distribution in Indonesia during this period. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Gini ratio experiences an increase in March and September 2020. After 2020, the Gini ratio fluctuated until March 2023, rebounding to 0.388. This is the inequality in Indonesia, but we also make the calculation for urban and rural comparison, that the Gini ratio in urban areas in March 2023 was 0.409, which increased by 0.007 points compared to September. And in rural areas, the Gini ratio in March was 0.313, the same as in September, but decreased by 0.001 point from March 2022. We hope this information can give you an information about the inequality in Indonesia, but this is based on Gini ratio. In the next slide, this is Indonesia expenditure distribution based on World Bank classification that I have explained before. From this figure, in 2023, the share of the bottom 40% in total expenditure is only about 18%, while the share of the highest of the region is more than 46%, and the share of the middle 40% is about 35%. We can go to the next slide. This slide, I compare the inequality from the report 2022 and our expenditure base that BPS have. From this table, we can see that our calculation from expenditure base are more likely closer to the income inequality than wealth inequality from your report. And from this table, we can see that in Indonesia, in 2023, the share of the bottom 50% in total expenditure is less than 25%, while the share of the richest 10% is over 31%, and the share of richest 1% is over 7%. Now, the next slide, I would like to show that the relationship between poverty and inequality does not always show a one-way relationship. From this figure, we could see that poverty decreased from 9.54% in 2022 to 9.36% in 2023. On the other side, inequality become increased from 0.384 to 0.388. I would like to explain this condition, but this is can be a discussion because we want to ask the question about it. In Indonesia, poverty and inequality calculation are carried out using different population. To calculating poverty, the focus is on the reference population, while for the Gini ratio, the calculation involves the entire population. Therefore, a discrepancy between change in the poverty rate and inequality may occur. For example, in the last period of March 2023, Indonesia experienced a condition where the poverty rate decreased while the inequality rate increased. This could happen in the right figure. We can see because the poverty and inequality are affected by the speed of expenditure growth in the population groups, especially the upper and lower groups. As an illustration, it can be seen in the following figure. In one country, these are 4 groups of population, namely extreme poor, poor, almost poor, and not poor. When some residents who are close to the poverty line experience an increase in expenditure, then these residents can get off of the poverty line and become a near poor group. This causes a decrease in the percentage of poverty. However, if at the same time there is a decrease in expenditure of the extreme poor and increase in expenditure of the upper class, when the gap will be widened. So the Gini ratio will get higher. I confirm this issue from you, Nitin and Mark. Maybe you can explain about this also. And in the last slide, the next slide, this is about discussion about first, the income data used in this method is the aggregate data that you have present, Mark and Nitin. Yeah. And we have a question, how to divide the population into parts using aggregate data. Maybe you can explain about this to make us clear about your methodology. And does this method allow for disaggregation at the smaller level, such as provinces and urban districts? We know you calculate this to compare inequality among countries, but if we can calculate with your methodology in Indonesia, need to disaggregation by province and urban district. Yeah. Maybe you can explain about this. And the second one, Indonesia has used the expenditure data approach to measure inequality that I have explained before. This is because the administrative data of individual income is not yet available. What is your opinion regarding these issues? Maybe our calculation can be improved with your methodology. This is our question. And the third, from your methodology, compare the bottom 50%, middle 40%, and top 10%. How to interpret the results for this method, especially for carbon emission inequality? Maybe you can more detail explain about this topic. And you, I have present about World Bank distribution method that three categories for interpreting the result. For example, if the expenditures are for 40% of the low-income population is less than 12%, this is considered as low inequality based on World Bank criteria. How about your opinion about this? And the fourth, about extreme inequality. Is there any specific method to measure the extreme inequality, like poverty, global poverty, and can be interpreted as the extreme poverty? Maybe you can give the information about this. And what is the what is the cutoff for inequality to be considered extreme? And next, about their area. There are a lot of inequality measurements in the report. Gini ratio, etc. Many of the methodology that we have learned about this. What are the drawbacks or weaknesses for each method, and which one is most suitable for Indonesia? Because until now, Indonesia use Gini ratio. How about the other methodology that you think suitable for Indonesia? And the last one, what is the urgency of calculating the wealth index? Yeah, we don't know you use what kind of data to calculate wealth inequality in Indonesia. Okay, Pak Yanu, Mark, and Nitin, this is my presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bu Nurma. I think your question is quite interesting and important, and it's also what in our mind as well, Nitin and Mark. Like we have a lot of question, and I think we will not solve it in one day. We need a workshop, probably like a regular workshop with Nitin and Mark to answer all those questions. But hopefully, in this short discussion, you can address a little bit about what Dr. Nurma brought in our meeting today. But before that, I think we want to hear from Marlis for another perspective on the inequality. Go ahead, Marlis. Time is yours.
Thank you, Mas Yanu. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope everyone is doing well. Thank you, Mas Yanu, for the opportunity. And Pak Nawawi, Bu Nurma, Nitin, and Mark, great to be connecting here. May I share my screen? 1 second. It's very light presentation. Okay.
Yeah, while you're waiting your presentation, Marlis is the founder of Green Network Asia and also the INFIT Research Fellow. She is one of the, I think the young researcher and scientists as well that focus on the environmental issue and climate issue, gender issue. So I think this is a really good opportunity to hear from your generation, Marlis. I mean the young researcher, how they see this inequality in your perspective. Okay, go ahead. We can see your presentation now.
Thanks, Mas Yanu. Such a heavy description. It's a bit very multidisciplinary area. So pardon me if I might not be very detailed in my delivery. So probably I can start with introducing about Green Network Asia. So we do public affairs consultancy specifically for sustainable development, and we have a digital media platforms advocating sustainable development. Also, like for example, turning reports, difficult reports like this into easy reading digital publications, so everybody can learn about that. So we want to engage with multi-stakeholders in different organizations to mainstreaming the sustainable development for the realization, because the time is really approaching, right? So that's what we do. And probably I wonder what I can contribute to this discussion. At the beginning, I read very quickly about the report, Mark and Nitin. It was wonderful. Thank you for the contribution. It is really a public good as the first finding in the report. And actually, I think when it comes to especially achieving the SDGs 2030, I want to see more probably in the next reports, right? I don't know if it's published annually or I don't know, but I think from the SDGs indicators, targets, like for example, on the goal 10, there are some areas like how the innovative financing can help the developing countries, and then about the migration, about the refugee, those issues that might be interested to be covered in the report later. But I think for now, what I think I can a little bit contribute, because Mark and Nitin just now already talked about it. I want to talk a bit about climate inequality in, I think, 2 dimensions to look at it. First is unequal contributions to climate change and unequal impact of climate change. And we can discuss later about how to tackle climate inequalities. There is this quite comprehensive study, climate inequality report, that we can learn, but I don't particularly rely on those reports. I just want to share what we have done in our team at Green Network Asia with our light digital publications, what we have documented so far about these areas. Just now, Mas Yanu talked about well, many dimensions of climate change, right? So we will discuss about that. So maybe what I wonder to ask everyone, but unfortunately we cannot really discuss at this time, right? Just to reflect, did you feel the very hot weather last month? If so, yes, or if you don't feel it because you might work in very comfortable with nice aircon, you might be among the 40% of the middle or 10% of the top or even 1% of the top, right? We can ask ourselves, but this is actually happening, right? The era of global boiling has arrived according to the Secretary General of the UN. So this is indeed a very urgent public challenge that we need to tackle together, like everyone, even from the communities that are likely not connected, like for example artists. How can artists get involved in this climate action, right? Like everybody, literally. I want to talk first about the unequal contributions to climate change. So here I just share some publications. We actually publish quite many every day, Monday to Friday. So pardon me because I cannot really share like many of them comprehensively, like Nitin and Mark's presentation here due to my time constraint. But you can go to our website, Green Network Asia. It's international publication in English, also the Bahasa version. We have the Bahasa version for the Indonesian audience. So my team actually made a bold a statement that climate change is a class issue. So it's really economic, social, and political issue, right? And as the report, I think it's in accordance with the Global Inequality Report, the Climate Inequality Report, that the most underprivileged groups of the population are the most affected, actually. So here is a very a few figure or facts from the unequal contributions to climate change in terms of countries. Well, it's from 2017, the data from our publication, but I think the figure will remain similar, right? Especially in terms of the contributing countries, the historical contributors from the colonialism history, and then the global north. These are the figures, and we can update. Also, in terms of companies, private businesses, turn out not all the businesses, right, contribute equally, but only around 100 companies that are responsible for more than 70% of the green.
Hello, Mbak Marlis. Are you frozen?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the figure in, I think, 6 years remain the same, and this is a challenge, right? And then about the impact, we often heard about the impact that it disproportionately impact the underprivileged groups, but we can actually go deeper and apparently a very different variations of impact. We write here some of the impact for the cities, for example, for the extreme heat waves. These are the findings. What is the problem with heat waves? Actually, it can cause abundance of heat-related illness and even death, like we just saw from the news, right? In India, it's very unfortunate and difficult news. So you can also learn from the IPCC report released earlier about the temperature. Even we can feel ourselves, right, in our daily life. So these are among the impacts that we see firsthand. So, Mark might be familiar about it, but this happened in almost every coastal cities, right? In small island developing countries, even Jakarta is sinking, right? So this happened due to the impact of the climate crisis. And then in Pakistan, we cover many different areas, basically within Asia and Southeast Asia particularly, and even Africa, because it's among the top topic of inequality, right? So Pakistan has been affected severely due to glaciers melting, because 70% of their source of fresh water come from this, right? And then for different purpose in the country, and only last year they had quite many floods from this. And then flash droughts, it happened in many parts of the world. Droughts are already difficult, and then flash droughts are even more difficult because people cannot really get prepared to anticipate. So, and another dimension that we might be rarely thinking about is actually culture. So climate change can impact culture and historical sites, like what happened in China. So this cultural heritage is actually under threat due to the extreme rainfall after centuries of dry desert condition. And then in Australia, in terms of biodiversity, so it affects people, especially the women and girls, right? Especially the poor women and girls. It affects disabled. It affects even all this biodiversity and everything else, so many of them. So this is the figure in Australia. It's the biodiversity partly driven by climate change. So, okay, actually, we also cover good practices from around the world, also lessons learned, definitely, just to give reference for the world, for all the stakeholders at the respective different level, so they can figure out. I think in terms of climate policy by governments, many of them, again, because of my time constraint, I cannot really provide everything, but this one among the recent ones from India, civil society movement, how they try to create this movement for the grassroots women in India, because they want to help with food security, to be independent with their own food security efforts. This can be modeled actually by civil society organizations in different parts of the world, especially developing countries, the global south, how to do that. And then, well, media is like what we do. It's very important. What I learned from my own experience with my team is really, it's very, the escalation of the problem compared to our efforts are very, very far, So we learned that, like, journalists and then digital creators, they haven't really had this ability to catch up around these issues, because it's not that easy indeed, because it's social science involving many multidisciplinary areas. So I mean, we have to work on it, and media has huge roles in disseminating the awareness, around the public, even the policymakers in governments, businesses, and civil society. We have witnessed firsthand how, for example, investors struggle with the concept of sustainable finance, and then they find it difficult to measure whether my investment is sustainable or not, or harmful to the SDGs, for example. So there are many things need to do to address these gaps for all parties, even including the governments from national to the local levels, and even the civil society groups from the national to the local levels, particularly the local levels, because they have like capacity building and those things. Okay, I don't really cover much on this presentation, but let's discuss further. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Marlis. I think you covered enough issues and very important discussion related to the climate and justice, and how the unfortunate class or group that really affected by the climate change, as well as the 50% bottom of the population. And I think you make some really great statement that our effort compared to the problem is not really, it's still unequal, you know, like the highly unequal, the effort that we do to tackle the climate change, and how the bigger problem is. So I think we already heard many opinion, many data, many statement, and also many effect from inequality, income inequality, gender inequality, climate inequality, as well as wealth inequality, and also the poverty itself in Indonesia from Dr. Nurma. So I think we still have like 30 minutes for discussion session. But before we jump to the question and answer, I think Nitin and Mark want to address some of the question from Dr. Nurma first, probably quickly, and then anyone, if you have any question or concern or want to say something, adding something to our discussion, just raise your hand or just put your comment in the chat room. So Nitin, you want to start with addressing the question from Dr. Nurma?
Yes, sure.
Okay,
I can
cool.
give a try. So I have projected the questions which were given to us. I mean, as you said, there are many questions, and I guess many of them are a bit subjective also, which you know it requires a lot of debate and discussion. But let me try to answer some of the things which are, I guess, is easier, and we have much more idea about it. Okay, so let's start with. So I think I missed the point. What is meant by dividing the population into parts, but you can tell me later. But let me move to the second question, which is whether the method allows for disaggregation at the smaller levels, such as provinces. So the answer is yes. However, it will be more data demanding. So one thing in the surveys, which I guess we all know, is that surveys are representative only up to a certain level, right? Because it's the surveys are basically a random selection of population. So for example, it depends from survey to survey. And for Indonesia survey, I'm not sure, but let's say if the survey is representative at the provincial level, then on top of that, as we sort of combine this survey data with the tax data, if we also get this information on the tax return by different provinces, then the answer is yes, that one can use the same methodology by combining these surveys and tax data, and also, for example, at provincial level accounts data. to sort of make it, to provide a full picture, because we also do like DINA, which combines this national accounting figure. So if all those information is present at the provincial level, then one can do exactly the same job at that level. But sometimes, as we have shown, that we have, let's say, for the entire world, this the inequality numbers, but some of them are with very good data, but some not. So depending on, let's say, if, for example, the accounts data are not present at the provinces, but the survey and, let's say, the tax data is present, that already gives quite a lot of information to us. Okay, now the question about using the expenditure data approach versus the income one, or let's say expenditure versus using wealth. So all these consumption, income, and wealth, they have their separate importance, their separate definition, and hence the generated inequality statistics will also give you a different picture, right? Now, it is true that in most of the developing countries, especially in Asia or even in other countries, the data capturing on expenditure is much more robust than capturing the data on income. And this is something with Yanu we discussed in our very initial calls, that why this income approach is something which has taken precedence over the expenditure one. So one reason is, first thing, from the comparative perspective, I think it's not good to sort of use let's say one country data of income and the other for expenditure, because the inequality computed through the expenditure data is going to be lower than the inequality which is computed by the income data. And the reason is very simple. The reason is that because in the expenditure, there is a minimum threshold, which, as you mentioned in this presentation, let's say based on this, the consumption of 2100 kilocalorie, right? So if we go by that logic, then all the surviving population, they must be receiving this minimum, they must be consuming that minimum threshold. And that's why, because we are kind of putting a ceiling on the minimum value of consumption, that's why it leads to lower level of inequality. However, in income, or much more in wealth, because in wealth one can be actually in debt, which means negative wealth. In income also, there are cases where a person might not be earning anything, and so there is a possibility of zero income. So because of all of these things, the inequality data computed by wealth or by income or by expenditure have different meanings, and by expenditure it gives a lower figure. Now, is it possible? So there are nowadays ways. So for example, in India, it was the same case, that expenditure data was much more published since the beginning of independence, so from 1950s onwards. But then in recent years, there were some surveys which started capturing income. So there, one of the adopted methodology was that if, let's say, if in every decade or so, you have this information on income as well, one could compute the income consumption ratio by different percentile and assume that that ratio has remained similar for certain years. And then based on that, one can use the expenditure data to somehow estimate the income, and then use that income value for the inequality measure to have a to compare with the other countries in the world, right? But of course, if the idea is just to use the expenditure data and do, let's say, a provincial level estimation, that is of course possible. It's not impossible, but the problem is, how would one get the very high expenditure information, right? So for example, the consumption of luxury goods, I would assume that those kind of information is absent from the expenditure survey. So unless we come up with some way where we can fix this missing of the very high expenditure observation from this survey, we will always be limited. Whereas when one uses income, then we can always back up this survey by this tax data to give a complete picture, or in case of wealth, by some rich list data to sort of provide this information.
Sorry, Nitin, I have one question, I believe, for Professor Nirma, which is that in the Susenas, which is used to calculate poverty rate and so on and so forth, I believe that there is a income module, module 5, the Susanna's cover income, I believe. I'm not sure. So I think that, I mean, there is some information available to estimate inequality based on income definitions. Or if I'm wrong, you can correct me as well.
Yeah. Bu Nurma, do you want to say about the module 5?
Actually, from Susanna, the question about the income is in the Korea, not in the module, but this variable or this data is not disseminated because for the internal calculation, for example, for calculating the GDP. This income data, we think under coverage. That's why we use the expenditure for calculating poverty and inequality. Yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, BPS not disseminate this data. I'm very sorry about this.
No, I understand the point, and thank you for your answer. And to add on top of what Nitin has said already, I believe that for Indonesia to have a good estimate of income inequality, which again measures something different from expenditure, right? In a way, income is directly generated by the market, so we can directly measure how much inequality is caused by the market. To have that, I think that the income information in Susanna's is one of the most crucial, and very much. And I understand in terms of underrepresentation or so on and so forth. It is the case for most countries. One way that we can perhaps work around the data quality issue is perhaps, for instance, in the case of Thailand, for the years that we have income and consumption data, as Nitin says, we can calculate the ratio and then apply to the consumption, which may be more accurately measured, for instance. So, but in order to do that, at least we need some income information in the same set of data, which is the Susanna. So I believe that, like, perhaps if we are to move towards income inequality discussions or wealth inequality discussions, we can collaborate with the BPS and like have, for instance. So yeah, so I think that's what I would like to add to the second question.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. Nitin, I think before you continue to answer that list, I think we have two audience here, Professor Subarudi and Mardiana, that want to ask some question. Can we hear from them first, and then we can continue that discussion? Prof. Subarudi, you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I agree that the Cooperation Guinea is not telling, what happened in the inequality. Yeah, because we just use for the expenditure. For example, I eat 20,000 per day compared to the 1% maybe 100,000, but the income maybe I just 600,000, but the other one is about 10 million. So it means I agree that we have to calculate more about the income distribution. Income distribution, okay, this is of the record or something like that. We can use also the saving account in the Bank of Indonesia. There's a release about how is the account saving account of the all people. This way, if we see the ratio Guinea is only 0.39, almost 4. Yeah. But in the expenditure, in the income ratio is quite significant. For example, 0.02% of Indonesian people occupied around 50% of Indonesian saving. So I agree that we have to try to change the coefficient Gini. But coefficient Gini is all right for calculate the land. For example, our now coefficient Gini for land is on 0.78. It is all alarming for us. Thank you very much, Bayan.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Subardi. Yeah, I think I agree that we need more measurement rather than just a Gini coefficient to see the reality of inequality in our country. Okay, let's go ahead to Mbak Mardiana.
Thank you, Mas Yano, and hi everyone. I'm trying to be very quick. Either expenditure data or income data. I'm trying when we are going to measure the specific population, such as people with disability, when they have a higher level of needs, and the assist, and as we realize that assistive devices cost a lot of money, of course. So, I think the data will be biased when we use either expenditure or income data to measure inequity. So, is there any way to measure the right measurement for specific population, including older people and also children, for example? Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Diana. Okay, I think we need to hear another question first, and then so every speaker can address all the question. Anyone else wanna ask question, give an opinion, or share some thought? Anyone? Not yet?
Okay, maybe I want to ask Mas Yano.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your very informative material for today. My name is Adi. I am from Forum Zakat. We are association of 194 Zakat organization in Indonesia. Maybe all of you already know about Zakat as an Islamic tradition or maybe activity in Indonesia. It works like tax in Islam, and I'm just learning about poverty and inequality today, and I have two questions maybe you want to answer. The first one is which one is correct, do you think, in Indonesia? Inequality create poverty, or poverty creates inequality? And then I want to ask, maybe you have a design about how zakat would help inequality reduction in Indonesia. I think that's my question. Thank you, Mas Yano.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Adi. That's a really good question. As long as we know that Indonesia is the largest Muslim population, and zakat is like annual tax for Muslims, and that's a really good question, whether it will be contribute to lower the inequality if it distributed well, or is there any relationship between poverty and inequality, and also how probably zakat in other countries probably will be a sum of solution to help the poor or the 50% of the budget. Okay, thank you, Mas Arti. Anyone else? One more, maybe? Okay, if there is no other question, let's maybe start from Nitin and Mark, and then Dr. Nurma and Marlis, if you want to add some feedback from all those questions. Go ahead, Nitin.
Yeah, I don't know. Should I just, I don't know, finish this one?
Yeah. You can just continue and then add more from the question.
Yes. Well, yeah. So I guess, I mean, the other questions were like, how to interpret the result for this method. I guess it's so, and I think the linked question is there are several methods which are used to measure the inequality, and which one is best or not, right? So I guess I mean, Gini is used more often, let's say, than other, just because it kind of consolidates the entire inequality in one number, and it makes it very easier, right? So that's why it's much more popular. However, the Gini gives less information in terms of where let's say, if we are looking into the evolution, if from one time period to another time period, we don't know which part of the population is actually getting affected. So even if the inequality, let's say, remains same, there might be some other internal changes which might be happening. So that's why I think here in the lab, we prefer this share which is accumulated to the top 10% or top 1% as a good measure, because it also sends a signal, or like it is much more easier to interpret what it means. Whereas if I tell anyone that Gini is 0.6, unless I think people who are in academia, they might understand, or they might have a feeling that, okay, 0.6 is more than 0.5, so it's more inequality. However, I think top 10% share, it is much more intuitive in that sense. And that's why this figure is always the headline figure, or like top 1% or top 10%, like the share of income going to that, or share of wealth. And hence we push for that measure. Yeah. And then, I mean, for sometimes, so the reason why in the report slightly more measures are used, because nowadays in academia, more and more, like, people are coming up with different measures. Some measures, for example, like one weakness of Gini inequality is that it cannot be decomposed into between and within, which sometimes gives a very good descriptive picture of why the inequality, or how the inequality is changing, whether it's because of the between component or whether it's because of the within component. So that is not possible by the Gini inequality measure, whereas Thales inequality measure allows for that decomposition. So I guess there are reasons behind why certain method is used in the report. And I guess, I mean, we can talk about one by one on every other, but every measure has its own, I mean, some drawbacks and some usefulness, right? So this top 10% share, I would say, is more about the intuitiveness.
Right. Is Nitin frozen?
Yeah, I guess so. Do you wanna
okay. All right. If I'm to add on the interpretation of why the World Inequality Lab is using less and less Gini coefficient and more of the income shares, like top 10, bottom 50, is again because it's actually quite flexible. Most of the time when we estimate income distribution, we do it by percentile, from 0, 1, second to the hundredth, right? And you can group it however that is, you know, that makes sense to the context that you're studying. For instance, in the case of Thailand, using bottom 50 makes much more sense to bottom 40, like the World Bank, let's say, because the bottom 50% of Thailand mostly are in agriculture and in informal economy, right? The adult population is half is in informal economy, and most of them are the bottom 55. So for Thailand, that makes sense. Maybe if things change, we would adopt 40 or maybe 60 if inequality gets worse, for instance. So it is actually a more adaptive approach. So it really is up to the researcher or the user of data to, you know, in a way, choose whichever statistics to use. For instance, if we go to the World Inequality Database website, you can actually select the percentiles that you want to have the statistics on, like how much income share do they have, for instance. And another reason why I think researchers are moving away further and further from Gini coefficient is that, as Nitin says, it allows for a more flexible discussion. For instance, in the case of Thailand, with the current political situation of Thailand, there is a very interesting pattern where the Thai middle class, right, have become an anti-democratic force. right? So analyzing how the middle class's income share or how their experience in the last 30, 40 years have evolved, have compared to other groups, right? The gaps between them and the bottom, them versus the top, have somewhat gave us a more interesting theory and with the economic foundation of why there is now, or there has been 20 years now, of anti-democratic sentiments among the Thai middle class, for instance. So these analysis or discussions would be less possible with just simply the Gini coefficient, for instance. So again, with which statistics you use, whether it's ratios or index or shares, it's built from the same database, and so it's really up to the users basically, and that's what we aim to do, have that flexibility. Yeah, sorry, Nitin, you can continue.
Oh, no, thanks for adding, Mark. I don't know, maybe I can comment on this point, like which one is the most suitable for Indonesia? I would say, like, given like the thing is, the measurement of poverty rate was important and is still important, but I think, or we think going forward in future, I guess, as you also mentioned, that extreme poverty extreme poverty is going to be reduced in coming year, and I suppose that even in going forward, the poverty rate will be much lower and lower. So I guess going forward, the inequality measurement will take precedence over the poverty measure, and then within several inequality measures were discussed. As I said, like, I mean, what is the purpose of it? Let's say if we want to compute it for Indonesia to have an understanding where it lies at the world map. So then if at the world level, if it's computed using income, then I guess it makes more sense to use income inequality for the top 10% and so on. So I guess it depending on the usage, we can always compute different measures for Indonesia, right? Like, we are not saying that this is the best measure or this is the worst, but I guess every measure has some utility, and depending on the usage, one can compute different measures, right? Okay, I don't know. So what else?
There's a question from the audience. Yeah.
Yes,
I can.
indeed, those very. Yeah,
I think there was a topic between the relationship between poverty and inequality asked by Mr. RD and
yes. So whether poverty creates inequality or inequality creates poverty.
Can be both. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard to say something on this, and I guess there is no easy answer for it. And to be fair, I guess currently I have very less knowledge of Indonesia, especially in this long run, how things have evolved and so on, to make any concrete comment right now. I don't.
Yeah.
Mark, yeah.
So I think the Indonesian experience is very similar to Thailand and Malaysia in a sense that poverty rate fell very fast since 1960s, 1970s. Thailand, 1950s, 95% of population was poor. By 1997, eve of the financial crisis, it was down to 20. Similar story in Malaysia and Indonesia. I think that, yes, they are very much related, right? Poverty, we're talking still about gaps, about people, how far are they from a certain line where it divides people. It's very much related to inequality, but they are of somewhat a different animal. Again, if we're talking about poverty in the sense of expenditure or food consumption, calories consumption, and income inequality, it can totally go in the opposite direction, like what we saw today in the statistics. Right. For instance, in the case of Thailand in 1970s, Thailand was growing 7, 8, 10% per year. And that have lifted a lot of people out of poverty. Right. That had happened as well in China in 1990s and early 2000, where 1 billion people were lifted out of poverty. But at the same time, inequality is rising. So it is basically about the relative gain of the poor versus the rest of the population. Maybe, yes, they gained due to economic growth and poverty rate have been reduced. But at the same time, the rest of the gain actually is mostly elsewhere. So there is an actual case where poverty fell rapidly fast, but inequality rises very fast as well, like in Thailand, for instance, in China, in Russia, for instance, right? Or you can think of the opposite direction as well, or where perhaps economic growth comes with poverty reduction and also less inequality. For instance, as we discussed, Western Europe and North America from 1920s to 1970s until they start slowing down. Inequality was falling because the modern welfare state was being born, progressive taxation was happening, economic growth was being distributed more equally, and also reached the poor. So then, yes, poverty fell and inequality fell. So it is, again, this is what Nitin has stressed since the beginning of our presentation, which is that, yes, inequality, and also if we are to include it, poverty, in a way is a political choice. There's no natural law that dictates the relationship and trajectories. If that answers your question, Mr. Ardeen.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great perspective and answer. Thank you, Mark and Nitin. Dr. Nurma, do you want to address about the zakat? Is there any experiments from PBS that measure the zakat, the annual tax for Muslim, and then how it relates with the poverty and maybe inequality so far?
I think if we want to explain how the influence from zakat to the poverty or inequality from the expenditure-based calculation, if the richest or the highest 10% can contribute more or bigger the zakat for the 40% bottom of the bottom, it will be make the increase of expenditure for the bottom, the population in the bottom, and it will be make decrease of inequality and also decrease of the poverty. That's I think the explanation how influence of from zakat to the poverty and inequality.
Yeah. 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 Thank you, Bu Nurma. So we already have those measurement, or it's just I think PPS have the measurement on the zakat impact, or
no,
not yet, right? Okay.
Yes,
I think that's
we have no experience about that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Since we, like a very generous country, if you see a very religious country at the top of the world rank of religious and for the charity, Indonesia is really, really generous. So I think that will be another social and cultural dimension that we need to aware of when we talk about inequality and poverty in Indonesia. Mbak Marlis, do you want to add something?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mas Yano. This is very interesting to little bit contribute about how zakat can contribute to reduce inequalities and address poverty. So I have done this research to be launched actually next week about how to improve blended finance in development projects. So it's the problem is actually it's a problem of inequality between countries and within countries, right? Where the global financial resources are disproportionately concentrated in high-income countries, like around 81% according to the OECD, and only 19% flow to developing countries, and mainly upper developing countries like mostly China. So what about the lower middle income countries? No data available. So there is this very huge inequality in terms of financing between and within countries, like governments getting poorer while the nations getting richer. Actually, governments have very limited budget for development finance, and that's why in Indonesia context, the government has been aware that the SDGs financing gap, it cannot be addressed only using the development budget, like the government budget, the provincial budget, but it needs innovative financing by involving philanthropies and private sector's investment. And in terms of financing, this is a very huge potential in Indonesia, which is very unique to Indonesia because it's a Muslim majority country. And as Mas Yanu said earlier, it's very generous in charity, right? So I think based on our FGD earlier with the government, especially Bappenas, they plan to launch this faith-based finance involving zakat, infak, those religious-related instruments to fund the SDGs to address the financing gap. So it's not only addressing reducing inequalities like SDGs Goal 10 or poverty goal 1, but actually across all SDGs goals. This is a very important milestone, I think, that the government has been working on by deploying very local potential. So we will see that, Pak Ardi, because I think governments with the UNDP and all parties have been working with Basnas and many relevant stakeholders on it. So we will see. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a quite interesting and important information. Thank you, Marlis. And is there any other question? We already on 4 p.m. If you guys have another question, just raise your hand or you can ask directly to our speakers. Oh, yeah. Silakan. Go ahead.
Thank you for the chance, Mas Yanu, and my question goes to Marlis. Hi, Marlis. Thank you. I'm enjoying your presentation, and would love to know further about the impact, or maybe you already measure the impact or determinant of the zakat or any other assistance funds to poor people regarding the poverty reductions. That would be great to hear from your voice. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Answer quickly, Marlis.
Yeah, we don't really measure the impact of zakat, but what is becoming a good news that highlights for all of us actually is no longer on-off or individual efforts, but it's becoming a strategic development interventions. Like it's not only just from one person to the other, from one neighbor to another neighbor, but it's like at the whole national level. So it's the huge potential of the zakat, infak, and all this faith-based finance contribute very strategically to the. Of course, it's important about the governance. That's why it is also important for the government to create these platforms for constant good governance, measuring, measurement, and then reporting. So with those good governance practices, it can deliver its full potential, I think.
Right. So your study is in the qualitative part of that, right? If I'm not wrong. Or did you
Yes.
a quantitative study on that?
It was a qualitative research
okay.
to address, to check the accountability of the innovative financing, for these development projects,
Right.
whether it is accountable or not, whether it's sustainable or it's harmful to the poor, to the vulnerable. So we get those answers through the qualitative method because it's very difficult. There is no available data quantitatively.
Yes, absolutely.
There's also an input actually to the national data mechanism, as just now Mark shared. It is important to have those available data that will be helpful for researchers, for decision makers.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Marlis. And yeah, I think we cover a lot of issues, and it will not enough for 2 or 3 hours to discuss everything. But as I mentioned earlier, that our research center or our research group as well will continue to discuss about poverty, inequality, and social protection. And we are so lucky and very lucky, very grateful that we have Nitin and Mark here, because Dr. Nurma, we will also maybe want to have some collaboration with the PPS and also with the Directorate of Tax, that we may want to create some new measurement for inequality in Indonesia, and we will have some agreement on that, and we will work collaboratively and transparently, and with the Nitin and Mark labs as well. They will give us a guidelines and guidance how to measure inequality, not only with the Gini ratio or Gini coefficient approach, but much more like a gender and climate. But first thing, maybe in the income inequality itself, that we need to have annual report from Indonesia. So I think we will have another meeting, another discussion, another webinar with a different speaker, or with the Nitin and Mark as well, and other colleagues from the World Inequality Lab. But before we close this meeting, I think I will give Mas Nawawi, if you have anything to add in this closing discussion, Mas Nawawi.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Yanu, and thank you for all the participants of this webinar. Very active discussion and fruitful discussion, and we have so many data from this discussion. And I think I just want to send you chat, Mas Yanu, to use this data, to analyze this data, and perhaps to collaborate with Nitin and also with Tanasaks, and also with Bu Nurma and others scholars here who want to discuss further about what we discussed this afternoon. And we will very happy, of course, with Nitin and Tanasak, if you want to come to Indonesia, perhaps next day or in the future, if you want to be our research fellow here in our research center, we also open this opportunity, and we can discuss more in detail about what we discussed today. I think the collaboration is open to all of you under the BRIN to discuss specific issue, especially about this issue today that we discuss. I think that's all, Mas Yanu. The homework for next is to follow up this meeting. I think that's all, Mas Yanu. To you,
Thank
Mas
you so
Yanu.
much, Mas Nawawi. Yeah, the follow-up is we will have another meeting and another, maybe in person. Hopefully Nitin and Mark can come to Indonesia as well. But before we close, I think I will give like 30 seconds or 1 minute for every speaker to give to deliver their closing statement, and then we close our meeting. We can start from Marlis, and then Bu Nurma, and then Mark and Nitin. Marlis, you have a closing statement.
Okay, it's tough to be asked at the beginning, but okay, I think all these public issues like climate crisis that we have and other public policy issues, development issues, we should be really focused on how to not leave anyone behind, focus on those the least privileged as the very baseline indicators of our development program, and for accountability. So let's work on that together in anything that we can do in our capacity to help the vulnerables, the poor, the underprivileged groups, not only socially, but also environmentally and politically and socially, everything. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. I think I remember what Diana asked earlier about measuring on the vulnerable groups like disability, people with disability. That's also another challenge. Maybe we can discuss in more detail in next webinar. Okay, Bu Nurma, could you please deliver your closing statement?
I'm sorry, because I have another discussion. It is interesting for us involved in this discussion, because so many methodology in measure the inequality, and we are very still confused actually how to how to interpret the carbon emission inequality. And maybe for the next discussion we need the more detailed explanation about this. And we want to say thank you for Kak Nawawi and from BRIN to involve us in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Purnama. We'll do another discussion with more specific methodological discussion and conversation. Thank you so much again for your time. Mark?
Yes, well, thank you everyone for being here, and it's been a very interesting and insightful discussion, and I look forward to help and advance and discuss further the topics of inequality in Southeast Asia. And I've never got a chance to visit Indonesia, and I think I have no excuse now. So yes, hopefully see you all soon in Indonesia and Jakarta. And yes, thank you, Yanu, especially for this opportunity to meet everyone. And I'll leave the floor to Nitin.
Thank you, Mark. Nitin?
Yeah, I would like to thank, first of all, Yanu for organizing this. It was such a lovely discussion and very, I think, useful at this point as we move forward. So thanks a lot for all the participants and asking us the questions. I mean, some of those questions are really, I mean, we need to also go back and think on them and come back. So I guess you're right, like if we, like the next meetings are going to be much more like a follow-up of this and like useful for building the relationship and working on the Indonesia income inequality, like for this 1980 till now, they're producing this new series. So yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. For the next discussion, we will have a speaker from the Directorate General of Tax. So we will talk more about tax and then inequality. So we'll talk more deeper. And again, thank you so much for everyone and for your time, for your participation in this discussion. And we'll see you again in the next webinar. Stay healthy and billahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you. Terima kasih. Sehat-sehat semuanya.
Thank you, Nitin and Mark. See you in Indonesia, Jakarta. Thank you, Mas Yanu, Pak Nawawi.
Terima kasih, Bu Nurma.
Sehat selalu. Bu Nurma, boleh kita ke kantor, Bu ya?
Terima kasih
Main-main.
semuanya.
Ya,
Itu dong Mas Yanu kalau main.
Siap.